Getting engaged is a signal that things are about to get a little more serious, and you and your partner should probably iron out some key components before your upcoming marriage. Sure, you've talked about deal breakers and maybe even deal makers previously in your relationship, but when marriage is imminent, it's a whole new ball game. We're here to talk about some tips you should discuss as soon as you get engaged. When people explain the big talk that occurs before couples get married, some of the bigger issues, which we'll get to in a minute, are mentioned exclusively. By all means, heavy hitters like your partner's stance on children or religion, for example, absolutely have to be discussed. But you can't skip out on talking about the next big expenditure, your wedding. Disagreements on wedding budgets can cause a lot of stress, and in many cases, outright fights on how much should be spent and on what. So, since preparing for your wedding and marriage should really be a positive experience as a whole, eliminate future fights by outlining a very clear budget. Set a definitive budget you can then prioritize vendors, experiences that are most important to you for your big day. Pro tip, allow very little wiggle room in your budget. Continuing to increase it, even by just a little here and there, always adds up. Don't do it. The talk about kids. This is a biggie, and for really good reason. Although you and your partner may have discussed one another's thoughts on children earlier in the relationship, emotions and attitudes do change. Before walking down the aisle and before making your partnership official, take time to have a transparent conversation about children, preferably as soon as you get engaged. Remember, it's not as simple as whether or not you want to have kids eventually. There are many other moving parts that really have to be discussed, like how many kids you each want to have. How will you compromise on that final number if you don't agree? How do you plan on budgeting for those children? And are you willing to give up certain luxuries in order to build the family that you were hoping for? What if you run into infertility and if you can't conceive kids naturally, would you be okay with IVF, surrogacy, or adoption? And last but not least, if one of you chooses to stay home and take care of the children in lieu of having outside childcare, what will happen in the event of a divorce? It's very likely that that person will not be able to jump back into the position that they were in prior to leaving their job. So, what happens to them financially? This is where a prenup comes in. This is where you need to think about how alimony, support, or asset division will be allocated. And a prenup can do that. The third thing that you need to talk about, and I realize this is very broad, is what's negotiable and what's not. We all have certain aspirations in life. While they may vary person to person, some of these aspirations include a certain type of house, a certain type of car, incredible travel experiences, and maybe other indicators of a certain lifestyle. Do you want to live in the city? Do you want to live in the suburbs? How much of this is actually negotiable? It's important that you know the answer to these questions prior to getting married and that you've discussed them as a couple. Of course, things change. People get married, they have children, and maybe their priorities shift. The key is that you really have to discuss these priorities prior to moving forward with a marriage.